Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, I bought a new house and immediately noticed a family of proper Karens. These people pretended to be my relatives to gain access to my property while I was not there. They trespassed and essentially lived in my house, ruined my property and threw parties. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. I recently bought a new house after spending years in a cramped apartment saving up so I could afford something nice right off the bat while still having some money left over for other expenses. I found the perfect place, and the only downside was that the house needed quite a few renovations done. The garage, for example, was completely unfinished, but the price to finish it up was pretty low, amazingly. I didn't want to move in until it was finished, but I had taken some of my furniture over to the place along with some new pieces I bought specifically for this house. I also bought some food to keep in there in case I needed it after moving in. Plus, it would cut down on the time it would take me to move in when all of the renovations were finally done. The few times I was over there, I was greeted by different neighbors who wanted to welcome me to the neighborhood. One woman in particular named Sophie got my phone number and invited me to a neighborhood party she was throwing the next month. Another couple that I met, Karen and Steve, gave me a strange feeling. They were not hostile, but I got the sense that they were not greeting me just to be friendly, as they mostly asked questions about when I was moving in and who would be working on the house, but I assumed they were just curious. The renovations were going to take a few more weeks, but while that was happening, my new neighbors had their own plans for the house. The majority of this story is from the information I pieced together from other people in the area, as well as Karen and Steve themselves. They had seen that I was waiting to move in, and they knew it was their chance to get access to the house. While the contractors were working, they came up and explained that they were extended family who wanted to get the place ready as a surprise to me. They were allowed to enter the house, don't worry. I reported the contractors for their stupidity, and because the work was being done in the garage, no one really noticed that my neighbors had lied. They also kept things a little quieter until the workers had gone home for the day. They started off by using the house to throw a couple of back-to-back parties where they proceeded to let people leave their trash all over the house and got food stains on the majority of surfaces. Apparently, all of their friends are just as trashy as they are. They did not even bother cleaning up afterwards since it was not their house, so it being dirty did not bug them. I was completely unaware of what they were doing and therefore powerless to stop them at the time. Apparently, they don't have enough storage in their own house, as they started putting their old furniture, clothes and other random items in my house to keep it all safe. I think they wanted to get rid of everything out of their garage so they could use it for other purposes. Likely to party, and instead of just donating some items, they used my property. However, instead of putting their garbage in cans on the lawn to be picked up, they started putting it in my house out of sheer idiocy and laziness. I also later learned that they have numerous dogs and cats that they barely care for, only giving them food on occasion and never taking them to the vet. They let the animals roam free in my home and never bothered to let them out, which meant the floor became covered in food and animal poop, which makes me sad to think about. The poor creatures were stuck in a messy, empty house with no one to show them kindness. They did not stop there though. They parked on my lawn and driveway and completely destroyed the grass from repeatedly driving over it and leaving trash in my yard. It was at that point that Sophie, my kind neighbor, started to pay closer attention to everything that was going on. She had been chalking everything up to the construction and had even assumed that I was the one partying in there, but when she saw the cars, she knew Steve and Karen were taking advantage of the empty house for their own gain. She texted me the basics and told me to come over to her place so we could decide what to do from there. I was furious when I saw what they had done to the outside of my house, and that was only half of the damage. I didn't hesitate to call the police, as it didn't feel safe to confront them on my own. After all, I had no idea what they were capable of or how they would react, and I did not want to take a risk like that if I didn't have to. I also called a tow company to let them know that there were a few cars illegally parked on my lawn and I would need them towed as soon as possible, since I did not want to give them a chance to move their cars before getting caught. The officers arrived and talked with me about the situation, and I explained how I had bought this house recently but had not yet moved in, and my neighbors somehow got access to the place and decided to use it however they wanted. Karen and Steve were promptly asked to leave by the police, and I got my first look at what they had done to my home. Their animals had ripped apart the majority of my newly bought furniture, and there were beer cans and other garbage scattered all over the floor. It was a disaster and the smell was awful. Karen and Steve were adamant that I had given them permission and that I was lying to get them in trouble. Thankfully, the officers believed me. I was asked if I wanted to press charges and I said yes. However, I had an even better idea. I had discovered a way to get revenge on them that would be even better than just pressing charges. As I began cleaning up the house, I noticed drug paraphernalia amongst the other garbage strewn around and a strong stench of weed in my house. I started formulating a plan on how I would catch them, either buying, selling, or doing illicit drugs in their home and get them in far greater trouble. I paid close attention to people going in and out of their house and was able to record evidence of them exchanging drugs for money on their own front lawn. I also knew they were doing drugs in their garage and stored their supply in there as well, which is likely why they wanted to use my house as storage. One evening they were getting high in the garage and left the door open, seemingly unaware of the mistake or possibly assuming no one in the neighborhood would notice. But I saw the opportunity and called the police once again to tell them that Karen and Steve were engaging in illegal activities out of their home. When the cops arrived, the garage door was still open and they quickly moved to detain my trashy neighbors and collected evidence of their activities. Obviously, I'll take these entitled douchebags to court to replace everything they had damaged while squatting in my space, but it also felt great to see them receive already a small bit of punishment for their actions. It's highly likely that they will lose the house and they've already lost custody of their pets. Most of them were sent to various animal rescues, but I ended up taking in one of the dogs and have nursed her back to health. Messing with me was the worst decision they could have made. And the next one is titled, Residents Are More Important Than You. So I live on a cul-de-sac where I rent a back house from my landlords. There is another elderly tenant who lived inside the landlord's house I was very close with that we will call Good Sir. I have these neighbors next to me who I had gotten along with for as long as I lived there before the pandemic. The husband, we will call him Mr. Chill, has been especially cool with me. My neighbors have 3 cars and between them 2 belong to Mr. Chill and the wife, who we will call Mrs. Hypocrite. And the other car belongs to their daughter, we will call her the Hawk. When the pandemic hit, Mr. Chill's family, for reasons that didn't make sense to me, suddenly stopped parking their cars in the driveway and would park them all on the curb in front of their house, as well as the Hawk taking the spot I usually parked in more so than her parents did. Finally, after a few months of this going on, I see the Hawk outside and I ask her if she wouldn't mind sharing the spot that I used to park at with me, explaining my situation with being overworked and exhausted from my job. She gives me an annoyed look and just responds by saying, I use it. I realize I'm wasting my time, tell her never mind and go inside. Not even 5 minutes later, there is a knock at the door and it is Good Sir letting me know that the neighbors want to talk to me. Mrs. Hypocrite is standing there all pissed looking, asking me what the problem is. I explained to Mrs. Hypocrite what I said to the Hawk and she apologized for coming off so angry and says, you know, street parking is what it is. It is first come first serve and we are not parking to try and give anyone a hard time. The conversation goes nowhere, but we end it peacefully. About a week later, I am parked in my spot for a change and my girlfriend comes over to visit with our child. It is summertime and it is hot. Towards the evening, I get a knock on the door and it is Good Sir. He says the neighbor wants to talk and I see Mr. Chill standing right there and he just asks if my girlfriend could move her car because she's got a bunch of curb behind her but not enough for another car to fit. Before I can even say anything, Mrs. Hypocrite shows up out of nowhere and goes off saying, I'm so sick of going back and forth about this. She is double parked and there's not enough room for any other car to fit. I understand that she's your girlfriend and she's visiting, but I believe residents should get priority parking first. It looks like you guys are trying to save the parking for yourselves, and I'm not dealing with this anymore. She needs to move her car. I'm in complete shock and have a lot I wanted to say, but I don't and just go inside to ask my girlfriend to move. She thinks they are hypocrites and move just because she feels like that's all they have to feel proud of in their lives. The only reason I gave into them is just so my landlords don't get involved and risk it turning into them not wanting to renew my lease with me, otherwise I would have said something. Funnily enough, even though they got pissed at my girlfriend for double parking, the Hawk is the queen of doing that on our cul-de-sac without Mrs. Hypocrite telling her anything. Last year in November, Good Sir was not doing too well and went into hospice care, eventually passing away unfortunately. He gave me his car as a gift and a thank you for being family to him. I now had 2 cars, 2 spots and an idea. Enter petty malicious compliance. Mrs. Hypocrite said that street parking is first come first serve and that residents should have priority over the parking, and well then, so be it. I only need to use one car and the other one can just stay parked. Since I'm a resident, I decided to park whichever car I'm not using in the spot that I would normally park at and swap them out every 2 weeks in rotation. My girlfriend parks where Good Sir used to. The Hawk, her boyfriend, and Mrs. Hypocrite have not touched that spot since I started doing this, since one of my 2 cars is always there. As a little bonus too, Mrs. Hypocrite put one of their cars they are not using back in their driveway, and when there is a party going on and all the parking is taken up, the spot in front of their house is sometimes open, and since, again, I'm a resident, the guests have taken all the other spots, well, I guess I do need a spot to park at after all, right? Sorry Mrs. Hypocrite and or the Hawk, I guess you'll just have to park around the block and take a nice walk to get to your house. I am only following what you believe the parking rules should be. Rest in peace, good sir. I miss you every single day. I'll always love you as my own family. And yeah guys, what's the saying? Just a few bad apples can ruin the bunch or something like that? I guess every awful neighbor, especially if it is a family, you should not single out everyone in that family because there might be some good people in it after all. However, then again, imagine being a good person in a family full of Karens. It must drive you crazy. Either way, if you have enjoyed the stories until here, please don't forget to like the video because that would help me tremendously. The next one is titled, I Know the Owner. Yeah, you don't. Years and years ago, I worked retail as a minor. This was in the 80s or so. In some non-corporate businesses you could get away with this. I looked more grown up than most kids my age, probably because I dressed more adult than was usual for a dinky little gift shop. There were several Karen encounters, but this one was my favorite. Karen, you have to give me a discount. I know the owner. He always gives me 50% off of everything. Me, lady, I really doubt that. Karen, I know the owner. I'll get you fired if you don't give me a discount. Me, oh would you please? Please get me fired. Karen, what? Me, he is a slave driver. He doesn't even pay me. I wanna be fired. Karen, what? Me, the owner is my dad, and now get out. He would never give anyone a 50% discount because we'd be losing money. She is all red with embarrassment and rushes out without buying. I had to put back everything she brought to the counter, but it was worth it just to yell at someone. I was the only one in the shop that day since I was covering for my dad, so I knew I would not get in trouble. Oh, and yeah, I was not being paid, but my parents paid for my college so that I did not have any student loans, so I guess that was fair compensation. And the next one is titled, She Hates Pregnant People. I am 8 months pregnant, 26 female, and this takes place in March. A little over 2 months ago, I was in a coffee shop enjoying my evening with my 3 kids, 2 female, 4 and 6 female, and I just ordered hot chocolates for my 2 oldest babies and milk for my youngest. I also ordered a hot tea for myself when my name was called. There was a woman about 60 or so there, and we will call her Karen. She saw me reach for the tray with the drinks, but she got to them first and threw the drinks in the trash, crying about how I was being irresponsible and should not drink coffee being pregnant. The thing was, my oldest, we will call her Lucy, was standing beside me and she started crying and hugging my leg. The barista saw this and she made us more drinks, and again, Karen did the same thing. Lucy was crying harder, which got my other 2 kids, we will call the 4-year-old Sophie and the youngest will be called Erica, to start crying too. I then picked Erica up and Karen snatched her from my arms. Here is the conversation. Karen, how irresponsible are you? First ordering coffee for you and these very young kids and now holding a child while pregnant. Give me my daughter now. Karen, no. I will hold onto her for you. I'm a better parent than you. Me, listen lady, I ordered milk for my youngest, hot chocolate for my other 2 and tea for myself, and you have no right to touch any of my kids. Give me my damn daughter, Karen. At this point the cops came. I assume someone in the cafe called them. Most likely it was the barista. The cops asked me if I wanted to press charges since where I am from, it is illegal to touch anyone without theirs or their parents, and if it is a child under 16, permission. I told them yes, I don't know what happened after the cops took her away and gave me Erica back. The cafe refunded me for my drinks, made more and gave them to me and gave me free pastries since they felt bad. I tried to decline it, but they insisted. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I gotta say, dealing with a Karen does not sound so bad after all if you get free pastries. I mean, honestly, if you're at a cafe and they have some banger chocolate chip cookies, I would not mind dealing with a Karen for a few free cookies. If you have ever dealt with a Karen in public, please feel free to let us know in the comments about what happened. The next one is titled, You called the SPCA because I don't have a doghouse? backstory, my wife and I moved into our first house before we turned 30. And we did it without borrowing money from family members or a co-signer. Something I was especially proud of since I grew up poor. To top it all off, when we bought the house, my wife was still in college going for her master's. The house itself was not super expensive, in fact we got it for a steal, but it was in a highly sought after historical part of town. And although there was no HOA, the entire neighborhood practically competed to keep theirs looking the best. Other than when I was a child in the 60s and 70s, it is the only neighborhood I have ever lived in where I knew almost everyone in the entire street. Since the advent of cable TV, that is pretty rare these days. Our house was on the end of the street and there was a church behind us. My wife's grandmother lived across the street, which was a major blessing. Instant babysitter for our daughter, plus we could help look after her in her old age if need be. So we only had one next door neighbor who I shall refer to as Claudia, a Karen with a pinch of Nazi Gestapo, not in a racist way, but well, you will see. Claudia absolutely hated us with a passion. She was in her early 60s, came from money and spent the majority of her free time complaining about us. Either to the other neighbors or directly to us, and then the other neighbors she had to make sure everyone knew what trash we were. It was always some piddling BS like, sure, their grass was cut and edged, but not to neighborhood standards. She had appointed herself as the neighborhood's would-be HOA Nazi, except that all of her focus was exclusively on us and how we were screwing up. My wife and I had a dog before we moved in, who I shall call Jojo. She was an awesome dog, half Labrador, half Cocker Spaniel, medium-sized and super smart. I had taught her about 7 or 8 different tricks. During the day, while we were all gone, Jojo stayed out in the backyard. The impetus, one day, a rainy day, I come home to find a government notice on our front door from the SPCA. A fairly seriously worded notice that summarized to, "Get a doghouse or else we will take your dog." Since our backyard cannot be seen from the street, I immediately suspect where this was coming from. So I call the SPCA and speak with a really nice young man, and he explains that it did come in from a complaint, but he was not allowed to say who. I tell him I already know who would have complained, but I'm wondering why the notice seemed so harsh. There was real emotion in the way it was written. At first he sticks to the "we cannot say who called" thing, but then breaks down pretty quickly and admits it was Claudia, as well as the fact that he was the one who wrote the notice. "Man, she was actually demanding that I take your dog. I wrote it that way just to appease her so I could leave." No kidding? That's effed up, I thought to myself. Now here's the thing. Jojo already had a doghouse, a really nice one that my wife and I paid almost $300 for. I explained to the animal control officer where it was and mentioned that he didn't see it because it is tucked away on the opposite side of the house, but if he goes to the opposite side of our front yard, there is a crack in our fence he can look through to see it. He tells me, "That is completely unnecessary." He believes me, but he says that he's not so sure that that will satisfy our neighbor. Later, my wife says we should just move the doghouse to where Claudia can see it and that will solve our problem. But by this point, my blood was up. This was the last straw. You know, if she wants to call us white trash or gossip to our neighbors, I wouldn't have cared. But you just don't F with a man's dog. It would have been one thing if she had called the SPCA out of genuine concern for the dog. I could have forgiven her for that. But we knew she hated the dog too. She had either told us so or again complained to neighbors. No, I thought, this is going to call for a different approach, the compliance. The next day just happened to be Saturday. So my daughter, she was 5 or 6 at the time, and I made a trip to Home Depot. I took my daughter because I wanted her input and had her choose several items. I also asked if they had any wood scraps. But we lucked out. Once back home, I proceeded to build the ugliest doghouse in the world, complete with a day-glow green paint that was just slapped on. We then placed it in the corner next to her yard. We shared a fence that wasn't much for blocking the view of each other's yards, plus it was only about 3 feet tall. We heard nothing for about a week and wondered whether or not it even bothered her. Our suspicions were answered one day by one of our neighbors who stopped by to tell us that Claudia had lost her literal mind over it. She wanted it gone, but it stayed for more than 3 years right in the same spot. Of course, we left Jojo's other doghouse right where it had always been. Jojo didn't use it anyway, she was half Labrador and would literally sleep in the rain. She was a doofus. After credits info, our battles with Claudia were far from over after this incident. Within a year, we found out that she was complaining to neighbors about my truck, a late 70s Ford with a V8. It wasn't the year or the way it looked, it was the fact that I left every day at about 5:30 AM and our driveway was right under her bedroom. Well, this was an easy fix. Later that week, I had my muffler removed and a straight pipe installed. The state where we lived had no restrictions against it. By the way, that must be a lovely state. I also began starting my truck at 5:15 and letting it warm up for 15 minutes instead of leaving immediately. Oddly, we heard no more major complaints after that, just the occasional stuff about our yard, etc. After about another 6 months or so, it all came to an end. I came home one drizzly afternoon to find Claudia waiting by our driveway. She was very upset and asking me for my help. Her house was flooding. I had her lead me inside and saw what was happening. I told her I couldn't fix the problem, she would need a plumber, but I could definitely stop the water. I went outside over to our garage and fetched my water key that hooks up to the valve for the city's water main in front of everyone's house. I then shut her water off right as my wife was pulling in the driveway. Claudia thanked me and I followed my wife inside. "What was all that about?" she asked. I explained and my wife was kind of shocked that she would reach out to me, of all people. I thought nothing of it, but shortly thereafter, we found out that Claudia had stopped complaining about us. In fact, we never heard a single other complaint ever again. Weirder still, she started actually being nice. She would say hello in a pleasant, cheerful manner, and from that day forward she was a great neighbor. Fairly quickly, I stopped torturing her with my truck and removed the doghouse. I kept it in the garage for a while, in case it was a trick, but I never needed it again. And Ripe Stars, I gotta say, that story made me think, what if at some point or another you can be so nice to an awful neighbor that this person basically has no other way than to also be nice to you in the future? As we heard in a previous story, killing them with kindness is definitely a viable way of confronting a-hole neighbors. And Ripe Stars, with this we have reached the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and if you did, I would very much appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and maybe leave a comment as well as like the video if you enjoy my content. Thank you so much in advance, and I will see you again tomorrow.